Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Greidick. I'm Dr. Martha Greidick. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. You may have heard of the term digital overload, especially in the last 10, maybe 20 years, where technology has become an ever-increasing part of our lives. This is as true in our personal lives as it is at the workplace. When it comes to the workplace and the digital overload that can be associated with the workplace, this is a phenomenon that can have some negative effect both on the individual, their experiences, as well as their productivity or their output. Let's start by giving a definition of what digital overload is. This is a phenomenon when an individual continues to be exposed to too much digital information, too much stimulation from a digital experience, digital sources, so notifications, emails, endless demands for our attention that is related to technology and our experience with it. Digital overload, or an excess of information, digital or otherwise, can overload our ability to process this much information. As our cognitive process is impacted by this digital overload, there are multiple ways in which this can manifest. Individual experiences with digital overload will vary. Individuals will have different thresholds for what is an overload to them, and the symptoms or side effects that they exhibit will not necessarily be exactly the same as everybody else's. Digital overload may increase stress and anxiety. It can also decrease your attention span. It may impair your ability to remember things or recall things, so it may impair your memory. And as I already mentioned, it will potentially impact cognition. And for some, it may also impair critical thinking. And while this is by no means an all-inclusive list of how digital overload may affect an individual, these are just some of the more common ways that digital overload may be recognized as a person is experiencing it. When individuals are faced with digital overload, they may have trouble making decisions. They may even switch from task to task for a variety of reasons. Maybe inability to concentrate, maybe inability to complete tasks, maybe cognitive impairment. Whatever the case may be, task switching may be a symptom of digital overload. The bottom line is that when we are exposed to too much digital information on a daily basis, especially over a prolonged period of time, this can very easily overwhelm our cognitive processes. Beyond our normal exposure to technology, which is quite high in today's day and age, both at work and outside of the workplace, when it comes to our workplace experience, many companies, many organizations, many cultures, organizational cultures, have unspoken expectations related to digital information. For example, people might be expected to answer the phone every time it rings. They may be expected to answer emails within a certain amount of time. They may be expected to allow for any and every interruption throughout their workday. It's not difficult to understand how this can be tremendously disruptive. It can also affect productivity and have detrimental effects on the individual. This is why it's so important for both employers and employees to come together so that the organizational culture, the expectations, both unspoken and official, can be more realistic, can be addressed to be more realistic so that an individual is not expected to answer every notification, every phone call within moments of its arrival, but rather is allowed the autonomy to make the best decisions during their workday, allowing for fewer interruptions and more focus on their tasks and responsibilities. And while there has to be some kind of a balance between responding to digital notifications, digital information, and ignoring them for a certain amount of time, it's not difficult to understand that moving to either side of the extreme will be counterproductive, especially when it's allowed to go on indefinitely. Individuals must seek out the ability to conduct their work, to focus on their tasks with as few interruptions as possible. And in collaboration, the employer must provide the kind of environment that supports this. In other words, new norms have to be established and adhered to in order for digital overload to be properly addressed. Although communications is an important part of a productive workday experience, we must remember that communication without any restriction may become too disruptive. This is another thing to consider when we look at digital overload. That means that while open and honest and frequent communications are an important part of work, they become counterproductive if they are allowed to interrupt individuals to the point where their ability to complete their tasks is impaired. It's important that individuals be allowed to engage in what is sometimes known as deep work. Deep work refers to one's ability to focus on his or her work, on his or her tasks, without being interrupted, being able to focus on work for an extended period of time. Giving it your attention and concentration is key. This is where the importance of intense concentration comes into play, because after all, so often this is what yields high quality results. Deep work boils down to being free from distractions, being able to focus and continue to develop the skills of focus and producing high quality results over time. Not only does deep work come with the end result of increased productivity and high quality of work, but it also provides for job satisfaction. Imagine being able to devote your time, energy, and focus to your tasks without constant interruptions, where at the end of the day you have a sense of achievement rather than a sense of frustration of unfinished tasks. This is where setting goals, setting limits, creating a distraction-free environment, and adjusting one's schedule come into play. In other words, it's critical to devote a time to where distractions and potential digital overload or overwhelm is minimized or even eliminated for a certain length of time during one's workday. As I already mentioned earlier, this is something that has to be a collaboration of employee and employer. It has to be intentional and on purpose. Digital overload is something that is very real for many people in today's day and age, and it can truly affect our experiences. Considering the workplace, there are already enough of distractions, enough of information that is constantly coming at the individual, at the employee. But on top of that, many, if not most people, have additional distractions that are not necessarily work-related, that come from their personal life domain. Couple the two, and the workday can become quite disorganized and filled with too many distractions and too much information demanding our attention. Digital overload is just a matter of time at that point. It is up to the employee and the employer to collaborate in such a way that digital overload becomes a thing of the past, and forward movement toward wellness and focus are a constant at the workplace. As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. Digital overload has become an increasingly prevalent problem at the workplace simply because of the amount of information and the amount of distractions that an employee experiences at the workplace. These distractions are not only related to work, but also distractions that pertain to one's personal life. Too much information, too many distractions can lead to a number of negative effects, from inability to focus, to decreased productivity, to increased stress and anxiety, and the impairment of memory or one's ability to engage in critical thinking. Those are just a few of the potential effects of digital overload. Combating digital overload must be a collaboration between employer and employee, from setting limits, organizing schedules, and focusing on deep work and well-being are ways to move forward in a healthier, more productive, less disruptive way, decreasing or even potentially eliminating digital overload in the future. Our modern technology and the amount of information that comes at us every day, whether that's at work or outside of the workplace, is not going away. It is up to every individual and every organization to come together to intentionally and purposefully address digital overload. As this week unfolds, I invite you to consider what digital overload means to you individually, and if you are an employer, if you are in management or leadership positions. Not only do you have the responsibility of assessing digital overload for yourself or in your own experience, but also for the employees around you. Consider whether you have long periods of time throughout the workday where you can engage in deep work and accomplish high quality work, or if at the end of the day you are often facing a list of unfinished tasks which you had intended to complete at the beginning of that day. Addressing digital overload is absolutely critical in order to avoid the negative effects that often come with it. For those of you who experience this podcast in an audio-only version, I invite you to check out my YouTube channel, Stress Free with Dr. G, where you can find the video version of the podcast. While there, check out some of the other videos. They focus on stress management. Once again, Stress Free with Dr. G is found on YouTube, and the link for that is in the description below. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.